Let me ask you something. Have you ever really thought about whether the language you speak quietly shapes how you see the world? I don't just mean the words you use, but what you can actually think and perceive. It's a massive question, and today we are going to dive headfirst into the science and the history behind it. Okay, so let's start with the most extreme version of this idea, one you're probably pretty familiar with. George Orwell's 1984 gave us Newspeak. It was a fictional language, but it was designed to be a weapon. The whole point was that by shrinking vocabulary and getting rid of concepts like freedom, the party could make rebellious thoughts literally impossible to think. This dystopian nightmare is actually the perfect starting point for the radical theory we're exploring today. So here's our roadmap. We'll kick things off with that extreme idea, the language prison. Then we'll trace how this theory rose to prominence, see how it got famously debunked, and then explore its kind of surprising modern comeback. After that, we'll look at some fascinating evidence for how language really does nudge our thoughts, before we wrap it all up with what this means for your own mind's toolkit. All right, so let's just ask the main question right out of the gate. Is your language a prison? Are its walls built from grammar and vocabulary, strictly limiting what you're even capable of thinking? Or is it something else entirely? This question is the very heart of what's known as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Now, this idea didn't just pop out of nowhere. It was really developed by two American linguists, Edward Sapir and his student Benjamin Lee Whorf. They were totally fascinated by the huge differences they were finding between European languages and Native American languages, and they started to wonder, do these differences go deeper than just words? The idea actually has this long intellectual history. It started floating around way back in the 18th century with a guy named von Humboldt. From there, the great anthropologist Franz Boas picked it up, and he passed it to his student, Edward Sapir. Sapir refined it, suggesting language is like a lens we see the world through. But it was his student, Benjamin Lee Whorf, who really took it to its most radical and, well, its most famous conclusion. And this is Whorf, in his own words. What he's arguing is that reality isn't this fixed thing that we all see in exactly the same way. Nope. He says it's a kaleidoscopic flux of impressions. Basically, a chaotic stream of information. And the tool we use to organize all that chaos, to slice it up into pieces we can understand, that's our native language. So different languages mean you're slicing up reality in fundamentally different ways. This really powerful idea became known as linguistic determinism. This is the strong version of the hypothesis. Whorf's most famous example was his argument that the Hopi people have no words or grammar for time as we know it, no past, present, or future tenses. From this, he concluded that they must have a totally different cyclical concept of time, proving that language literally determines thought. I mean, this was a revolutionary claim. But was it actually true? Well, this brings us to the next chapter in our story, the Great Debunking. In the middle of the 20th century, scientists started putting Whorf's really dramatic claims under the microscope. And pretty quickly, the whole theory of linguistic determinism just started to unravel. The case against determinism pretty much came down to three things. First, critics found Whorf's research methods were, let's just say they weren't very scientific. Second, and this was a huge blow, another linguist later lived with the Hopi and proved that Whorf's claims about their concept of time were, and this is a direct quote, utterly false. It turns out the Hopi language absolutely has words for yesterday, tomorrow, and seasons. And finally, there's the most famous myth of all. You've all heard this one, right? The idea that Eskimos have hundreds of words for snow, and this is supposed to prove that language shapes reality. This claim, which Whorf helped make famous, spread like wildfire. But it turns out it's a massive oversimplification and exaggeration. It's now so infamous, it's called the Great Eskimo Vocabulary Hoax. And this quote from the linguist Steven Pinker, it just perfectly sums up the backlash. The universalist view took over. The idea that all humans share a universal foundation for thought, and language is just the tool we use to express those thoughts. The language prison, it seemed, had been torn down. The strong version of the hypothesis was basically dead. But that wasn't the end of the story. After decades of being pretty unpopular, the idea started to make a comeback. Not in its old, radical form, but as a more nuanced, more subtle, and, most importantly, a scientifically testable version. The whole focus shifted from determinism to relativity. And this whole shift really boils down to one word. The modern theory, which we call linguistic relativism, doesn't claim that language determines or limits what you can think. It simply suggests that language influences it.
It creates cognitive habits, kind of nudging us to pay attention to certain things over others. It doesn't build a prison, it just paves certain mental pathways, making them a little easier to walk down.
This right here is the core difference. The old, strong version saw language as a prison that constrains your mind. The new, weaker version sees it as a toolkit. Each language gives its speakers a unique set of cognitive tools, and those tools encourage certain habits of mind. So it doesn't limit what's possible, it just makes some ways of thinking more likely, more automatic. Okay, so let's get into the really cool stuff. The most exciting part about this modern comeback is that it's backed by some absolutely fascinating experimental evidence. Scientists can now actually measure these little nudges in the lab. So let's look at some of the most compelling examples. Our first stop is color perception. Now, in English, we have one basic word, blue. Sure, we can say light blue or dark blue, but they both fall under that big umbrella of blue. In Russian, it's different. They have two completely separate basic words, sini for dark blue and goluboy for light blue. There's no single word that covers both. So the question is, does this linguistic difference actually change how they see color? So in this really clever experiment, researchers showed Russian speakers 3 squares of blue and asked them to quickly pick which of the bottom 2 matched the top one. And the results were wild. When the 2 bottom squares were from different Russian categories, one was sini and one was goluboy, the speakers were way faster to tell them apart. It's like their language's categories gave them a perceptual speed boost. English speakers, who just see blue, didn't show that difference at all. But here's the clincher. This is the part that proves it's all about language. The researchers ran the experiment again, but this time they had the Russian speakers repeat a string of numbers in their head, a task designed to keep the language centers of the brain busy. And look what happened. The advantage completely disappeared. This proves the effect isn't some hardwired thing in their vision. It's language actively helping them perceive the world in real time. This effect also pops up with something that seems totally arbitrary, like grammatical gender. In one study, researchers asked German and Spanish speakers to describe objects that have opposite genders in their languages. Take the word key. It's masculine in German, but feminine in Spanish. When asked to describe a key in English, German speakers used words like hard, heavy, and jagged. Spanish speakers used words like golden, intricate, and lovely. The exact same thing happened for bridge, feminine in German, masculine in Spanish. The German said beautiful and elegant, while the Spanish said big, strong, and dangerous. So even when they were speaking English, their native language's grammar was shaping their perception. And this influence goes all the way to our very sense of space. Speakers of Gugu Yamathir in Australia, for example, don't use words like left or right. Everything is in absolute cardinal directions, north, south, east, west. They might say, hey, there's an ant on your southwest leg. And because of this, they have an incredible built-in sense of direction. It even affects how we process information. A study found that French speakers who read left to right tend to mentally build models from left to right, while Yemeni speakers who read right to left do it the other way. Okay, so we've gone through all this evidence. What's the big takeaway here? What does all this mean for us, for our minds, and how we actually interact with the world around us? The ultimate takeaway is this. We can pretty much throw out that old idea of the language prison. Language doesn't trap you, but it's not neutral either. The best metaphor really is that of a toolkit. Each language you speak equips you with a specific set of cognitive tools, concepts, categories, grammatical structures that just make it easier and more natural to think in certain ways. And this matters a lot. It means that understanding these linguistic differences gives us this incredible window into different cultures and worldviews. It shows that the very structure of our language can subtly nudge our perceptions every single day. And maybe most importantly, it completely reframes what it means to learn a new language. You're not just memorizing vocabulary, you are acquiring a whole new set of mental tools, a new perspective, a fundamentally new way of organizing reality. Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. If every language really does offer a unique mental toolkit, and that toolkit can genuinely expand the way you perceive, categorize, and navigate the world, what new thoughts, what new realities are out there just waiting for you to discover them?